Did you ever find yourself traveling with someone on a plane flight who had never been on a plane before? It can be an interesting experience. It happened to me once. I went with somebody who had never flown, and he was totally nervous, really anxious about it, and frankly also excited as well. I had to buy him a drink in the airport to calm him down, and we got on the plane, and everything was new to him, and everybody else, was just like cattle car. He was actually excited and thought it was great, and so I gave him the window seat so he could see things, and I was scrunched in between him and somebody else, and he's looking out the window, and his eyes are wide open like saucers, and he's, wow, taking it all in. And he looks at me and he says, "Father, down on the ground, the people look so small, they look like ants." And I said, "Well, we haven't taken off yet. Those are ants." But the point is, the higher up we get, the more distance we have from things, the more things are in perspective. Right? People who seem very important can seem very small when you're up 30,000 feet. And the whole world looks very different, right? Cities seem to be very small, mountain ranges, kind of insignificant. When you're up above the clouds, even all the storms that go on down on earth don't seem to matter at 30,000 feet. And something similar happens when you're up on a mountaintop. When you look down at the valley, you see villages and towns. And inside of each of those things, there's a lot of hustle and bustle, but you're removed from it. And you can see how everything relates to everything else. You can see in perspective, finally. In the Scriptures, a lot of important things happen up on mountaintops. It seems there was like a place of preference throughout all the Scriptures. Today we read about Jesus taking Peter, James, and John up to the top of a mountain. And there's a cameo appearance by Moses, and we know that Moses did quite a bit up on a mountaintop as well. And even Elijah, the prophet. Moses, we know, went up Mount Sinai and spent 40 days in the presence of God. And he received the 10 Commandments on the mountaintop. And when he came down, because at that time, looking upon the face of God, his face radiated. Nobody could look directly at him because his face was so luminous. Because he had looked upon the glory of God. He had to put on a veil. And he brought us down from that mountain the 10 Commandments. And in a similar way, Elijah, you remember when he was fleeing from Queen Jezebel who wanted to kill him, he went up on a mountain in a cave. And that's where he encountered God, and he heard the voice of God speaking to him. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" And the Lord spoke to Elijah there in the silence of that cave on the mountain. Well, today in the Gospel, Jesus takes these 3 apostles up with him to have an experience on the mountain, and Elijah and Moses appear. And it says that Jesus' clothing was changed dazzling white. Jesus is revealed in this transfiguration in all his glory. And we know that Jesus often went up the mountainside. All through the Gospels, it tells us different times he went off by himself to a mountaintop to pray, to be alone with God. Even the night before he chose the apostles, he spent the entire night on the mountain in prayer. And we see him also, after the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes, he sends the apostles across in the boat, and he stays on the mountainside to pray, to be alone with his Father. And many theologians have written about Jesus' prayer. Why did Jesus need to pray in the first place? He was God already, right? It's a good question. But there was something in Jesus that needed to be alone, to take time to be with the Heavenly Father. It was there that Jesus received the clarity about his mission, about what the Father's will was, exactly what God the Father wanted him to do. And it was in that prayer that Jesus' mission was laid out in front of him with great clarity and preciseness. So that when Jesus came down from the mountain, he was absolutely resolute about what he was to do. And nobody could sway him. Jesus went directly toward what the Father wanted. It says that Moses and Elijah were speaking to him about his exodus that would take place in Jerusalem. His exodus was his passing through, right? His death and resurrection that would come up. And the reaction of Peter to all of that, as the cloud comes down, which signifies the presence of God, Peter says, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tents. And then St. Luke is quick to tell us that he did not know what he was saying. So often Peter doesn't know what he's talking about. Right? The suggestion that he would make 3 tents, number one, it means that he put Jesus on the same level as Moses and Elijah when Jesus wasn't. And then secondly, it also signified that Peter wanted to capture that moment and hold on to it when Jesus' mission was to go down from the mountain and to go through that exodus, go through that suffering and death for our sake. And the voice speaks from heaven, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And that's the purpose of going up on the mountain, to be able to listen to the word of Jesus. And that's what we need to take away. That we all need some time on that mountain. We all need some time where we're alone and we can listen to the Lord, to listen to his voice. Because he's the chosen one of God. And everything Jesus tells us is God's will. Now maybe we don't have a mountain nearby. I don't see too many here. I see hills. They're all over the place. No, but they're not really mountains. And most of them, you go up to the top, there's a bunch of houses there anyway. So, right? It doesn't do us a lot of good. But maybe we don't have to go far away for a mountaintop. Maybe our mountain could be right here in this church. Maybe it could be in the Adoration Chapel. Maybe it could just be in our room where we could go be alone and speak with the Lord. And even more than speak, listen. It says that Peter and the others were silent. And they did not even tell anyone of this until after he had risen from the dead. That was good because they needed time to take it in. They needed time to internalize what they experienced. And we do too. We need time to be alone with God. And I think this Lent would be a great time for us to do that. Maybe to come here when we have a little time. Spend a little time in the church by ourselves. And more than bring a list of, demands, like we usually do. Lord, you got to give me this, that, and the other thing. But just come to listen to his word. To open up the gospel and say, Lord, what are you saying to me today? What do I need to know? How do I solve this problem I have? This crisis that's going on in my life? And listen for the word of the Lord. Maybe we need to do that in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Take your time. Maybe we're not seeing or hearing things clearly because we're down, not on the mountain, but we're down in the middle of the bustling town. And there's a lot of distractions there. There's a lot of noise going on. There's a lot of things that take our attention away from listening. But maybe we need to come here and listen. I remember seeing an argument on TV the other night. It was, one of the typical ones. But this one was a little different. This was some lady from England. She's in charge of something called birth strike. And these are people who are not going to have children because they think it's terrible to bring children into a world with global warming. And the guy that was questioning her was arguing with her and saying, well, maybe one of those children you'd bring into the world would be the person to solve the problem, get a Nobel Prize. And so they went back and forth and back and forth. And I just thought to myself, that's the typical kind of argument we get in all the time. We're so distracted by all of that sort of stuff. But we need more time to listen. those words of God, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to Him." So this Lent, are we ready to listen?